I genuinely do not understand the intensity of hysteria surrounding the release of the movie Joker Folie Adieu. Todd Phillips' sequel is not only a bold step worthy of respect on its own, but also a logical conclusion to the tragic story of Arthur Fleck. In this video I won't engage in remote debates with the film's critics. Instead, I'll break down the director's vision, which might allow you to see this strange and wildly hated musical in a different light. Enjoy watching. Let's begin with the main structure of the film, as established in its opening animation. The opening scene is incredibly important and often sets the key context for the entire story. Before us is a cartoon titled Me and My Shadow. It's a kind of retelling of the events from Murray Franklin's show, but with an emphasis on the conflict between Arthur Fleck and the Joker, who's portrayed as a shadow. From the moment Arthur steps out of the car, the shadow immediately reveals its desire to bask in the spotlight and delay Arthur, whose main objective clearly isn't to enjoy the show. Then, in the dressing room, a fight ensues between them, in which the shadow triumphs, granting it access to the stage. Along the way, it shamelessly harasses women and commits violence, and having become the center of attention, it humiliates Arthur, turning him into a laughingstock. Just before the police arrive, the shadow abandons him to face the consequences. Arthur Fleck is beaten and thrown in jail, which is where the film truly begins. On one hand, the director just reminded us of the conclusion of the first Joker. On the other, this retelling heavily distorts the actual events, while perfectly conveying the idea of Arthur's battle with his shadow, allowing us to carry this theme throughout the film. It's clear that Todd Phillips is drawing on the psychological model of Carl Jung, the founder of analytical psychology, whose ideas share some commonalities with Freud's theories. Phillips even references these in interviews.
Joker's a narcissist, but he's an egoless narcissist in our mind. You know, the ego is Arthur. The ego is the thing that's trying to control this wild horse that is Joker. But Joker is pure id. So we just thought, well, what happens when you go through your life wearing a mask, which a lot of people do. You're wearing a mask and you're pretending to be a certain way, and Arthur is very kind of controlled. But there are these glimpses of who he is underneath. What happens when you stop living that life and live as the shadow?
While there are differences between Freud's and Jung's views, they aren't crucial for our discussion. I'll summarize the core ideas as briefly as possible, intentionally simplifying many aspects. According to Carl Jung, the human psyche is not uniform. In the middle there is the ego, which is the center of all our conscious decisions and actions. Alongside it are classical opposing entities, the persona and the shadow. The persona is your social mask, your public face and self-image. The shadow, on the other hand, is the flip side of the persona, the blind spot of the psyche that contains all the desires and traits you repress. For example, if you see yourself as generous and want others to view you this way, this is part of your persona. Consequently, any impulses of greed are repressed and relegated to your shadow. Or conversely, if your persona is that of a tough, authoritative man, you repress any traditionally feminine emotions or displays of weakness. The persona is easier to recognize, while the shadow is harder because it resides more in the unconscious. As a result, it often manifests in dreams or is projected onto others. For instance, if you repress greed in yourself, you might find it more noticeable and irritating in others. Arthur's persona is his self-image, shaped by society, or more accurately, by his mother, Penny Fleck.
She always tells me to smile and put on a happy face. She says I was put here to spread joy and laughter.
Arthur is convinced that he must always be kind, humble, and caring, and that his sole purpose is to bring joy to the world. His ideal role model and father figure is Murray Franklin, whom he aspires to emulate in his fantasies. Arthur's shadow, therefore, is the personality he has always repressed, impulsive, fame-hungry, and destructive. Arthur listens to his boss's reprimands with a stoic expression, masking the anger boiling inside. He wants to release it, but suppresses it until he later vents his frustration on trash bags. You'll find plenty of similar examples throughout the first film. In the sequel, Arthur has a lawyer, Mariana Stewart, who defends not him but an idealized social image, his persona. Opposing her is another woman, Harley Lee Quinzel, who's entirely aligned with the Shadow. Both women are at odds, pulling Arthur in different directions. Mariana genuinely cares for Arthur, but sees him only as a member of society. Joker to her is a pathological antisocial phenomenon. In collaboration with Dr. Betty, she advocates for Arthur's hospitalization and the total suppression of Joker as a pathology. In contrast, Lee sees only the Joker in him and makes every effort to inspire and push him towards allowing the Shadow to dominate and destroying Arthur's flexed personality. From the outset, the director outlines two extremes for Arthur. The first is to obey his lawyer and the doctor, who attribute his psychological problems to childhood trauma. They argue for separating his personality and suppressing the Joker as a pathology, offering Arthur integration into society and a chance to avoid execution. Harley Quinn, however, refuses to acknowledge the sick, weak, and lonely man within. She ignores Arthur's past, his pain, focusing solely on the Joker and nothing else.
I want to see the real you.
This creates a straightforward yet deeply intriguing setup for the story. The dilemma is multi-layered and ambiguous because it's impossible to definitely determine which side is light and which is dark. On one hand, Mariana Stewart genuinely wishes Arthur well. At least I couldn't find any hint that she's doing all this for her career or fame, like Harvey Dent. I believe she sincerely does everything in her power to transfer Fleck to a better clinic, defend him in court, and ultimately save his life. However, we see the vegetative state Arthur was in at Arkham, and it was his encounter with Harley Quinn that pulled him out of this stupor, bringing light back to his eyes and reviving his zest for life. The Joker since the first film has been closely associated with liberation, often expressed through dance. The sequel reinforces this. During a transition between blocks, Arthur briefly finds himself outside in the rain, feeling free. He lifts his face upward and we see the guard's umbrellas painted in the color of the Joker's costume. For Arthur, this is also a defense mechanism, the only response to violence and a way to break free from the vicious cycle of suffering. Can we, understanding this, unequivocally call the Joker evil? The film begins with a clear imbalance in favor of the persona. After 2 years in Arkham, Arthur has completely lost his individuality. He's suppressed, passive, and unable to resist external influence. He's led by his mother's voice in his head, and there is nothing else there.
Do you often hear her voice in your head?
All the time.
Mariana wants Arthur to identify solely as a traumatized person, stripped of his self and alienated from the rest of society. This might save his life, but can it really be called living? The arc of our main character in the first Joker looked like the destruction of the persona and the Shadow gaining absolute power. Arthur's arc in Joker 2 is not a reversal of the first film's trajectory. Instead, it is about about integrating his shadow and persona, uniting them into his ego, and achieving psychological holiness. The story, titled Me and My Shadow, ends with the shadow's full integration, a hallmark of true psychological health in psychoanalytic theory. This follows a classic pattern. If you consider yourself to be a Napoleon, that's psychosis. If you think you are like Napoleon, that's neurosis. A healthy person, however, says about themselves, I am who I am. In the climax, Arthur identifies as both the traumatized clown and the bloodthirsty killer of 6 people.
There is no Joker. It's just me. I killed 6 people.
By the film's end, Arthur loses support from both Mariana and Harley but gains something far more valuable, himself. At the very end of the film, Arthur, for the first time in 2 movies, ascends the iconic staircase with remarkable ease, surrounded by a glowing light. There he's met by a disappointed Lee, who for the first and only time in the entire film addresses him by name.
Goodbye, Arthur.
We've just broadly outlined the film's central idea. Now let's delve into the details. Let's begin with the central question the movie invites us to ponder. Who is the Joker? It is Arthur's second personality, a collective fantasy, or something else? The answer, you might argue, has already been given. The Joker is Fleck's shadow, the part of his psyche where years of suppressed anger accumulated before being unleashed. That's correct, but in stating this, I deliberately left out something important. In the first Joker, it was argued that the central theme running through the film is humor and its cruel underside. The sequel develops and deepens this theme, constantly drawing our attention to the idea that every joke has a dark side, inseparably linked with violence. The idea is beautifully captured in the animated intro. Recall the original film's beginning. Teenagers torment the clown, snatching his props and hitting him over the head after hiding around the corner. They're amused by what they're doing, while Arthur is clearly not laughing. It's at this moment that the film title Joker appears on screen. Now let's closely examine a scene from the second part that comes right after the introductory animation.
You got a joke for me today?
This is the first line spoken in the film. Arkham guards constantly pester Arthur, demanding he entertain them and put on a happy face.
You better put on a happy face!
Hey Fleck, you got a joke for us today?
Yeah, it's been a while, hasn't it?
Hey, Fleck, you got a joke for us today?
I already asked him.
In the eyes of those around him, Arthur has always been a clown, perpetually forced to wear a happy smile that conceals a sad and lonely man. Not much has changed since then. Arthur is still in a depressed state, and his surroundings compel him to participate in their show. Lying immobilized with a sharp blade to his neck, Arthur is forced by a guard to listen and respond to yet another joke, one he likely doesn't even understand. We see a bloody, inverted smile form on his face. This scene, of course, is not about preparing a prisoner for a meeting with his lawyer, but about revealing our hero's psychological state and the dual nature of humor as a form of entertainment. Every person killed by the Joker in the first film mocked him, made him laughingstock, and simultaneously inflicted violence on him, both psychological and physical. The 3 men on the subway, his colleague Randall, Murray Franklin, and of course his own mother. The Joker isn't just a shadow, it's a shadow wearing clown makeup, a fusion of mockery in response to mockery, and violence in response to violence. The Joker doesn't emerge at the snap of a finger. It's an utterly uncontrollable dark horse for Arthur. For the shadow to surface, certain events or stressors must affect the conscious mind. Let's take a specific example. About halfway through the film, Arthur is in the courthouse, sitting passively as usual. He's largely indifferent to the proceedings, fully under the care of his defense team. Most of his thoughts at this moment are focused on Lee, but then his mother becomes the topic of discussion.
And she couldn't believe that he'd based his whole life around this made-up story. He was a street clown and he wanted to be a comedian.
She made fun of him for doing that.
She just thought it was ridiculous that he thought he could make people laugh. I mean, she said Arthur wasn't funny at all.
Arthur, who was already the center of attention, now becomes the object of ridicule, not for specific jokes, but for who he is, the relationships with women, his comedic aspirations, his dreams and efforts. This echoes the cruel jokes his mother once made. From a defense strategy standpoint, this works in Arthur's favor, making the jury more sympathetic to him. But it's the trigger that activates the Joker, something immediately visualized for us. We're transported inside Arthur's mind, a space of emotions, feelings and imagery, and thus must interpret what we see accordingly. In the darkness, a solitary light illuminates a clown seated on a chair. He begins singing a sad song about himself as the object of ridicule. Gradually, the song accelerates and transforms into a show where the clown becomes furious, beats the judge and shoots the cameraman, ultimately shooting himself in the head. This is what Arthur feels and tries to suppress. He wanted to act this way but resist his clearly antisocial desires. Paradoxically, it's precisely at the moment of peak resistance that the Joker is unleashed, taking full control. This is accompanied by applause from fans, Lee's euphoria and the loss of his lawyer. More accurately, Arthur rejects her assistance, but not before doing something he had been repressing, kissing her on the lips. I'll repeat because it's important. Arthur does not consciously control the Joker. The shadow simply manifests under specific conditions, and it's not always possible to suppress it. Resistance, on the contrary, only worsens the problem and eventually leads to a breakdown. However, in psychotherapy, there are ways to work with your shadow, to ultimately integrate it at least partially and gain control over it.
That's entertainment.
Now we'll shift our focus to Harley Quinzel, the local character who is an exceptional reinterpretation of the Joker's partner. From the lawyer's words, we learn that Lee had nothing in common with Arthur. She comes from a well-off family and lives in an affluent part of Gotham. Her father is a doctor and Lee studied psychiatry. She ended up in Arkham voluntarily to meet her idol. During the fire at the theater, Lee pulls Arthur away from watching the musical. She drags him out of the crowd into a hallway with flames raging in the background, which, as you'll agree, is quite symbolic. The heroes break out of the building. The Block B is engulfed in flames while it's raining outside. People around them are frantic and panicking, while the duo dances under the security spotlights. Afterward, they charge toward a group of reporters who have been hanging around Arkham for a week, hungry for a sensation.
You know they've been out there all week to see me.
On the gate, the girl performs the key lyrics of the song If My Friends Could See Me Now, whose title speaks for itself. Everything Lee is doing now is not for Arthur, but for herself, bathed in stage lights and the focus of cameras, for her photo on the front pages of newspapers, and the promotion of her persona in society.
She's been out there giving a lot of interviews about you and about herself.
Naturally, Arthur alone has to deal with all the consequences. After the incident, he's dragged into solitary confinement, while Lee simply leaves the clinic because she can. For her, it's nothing more than an extreme adrenaline show. When asked directly from her future with Arthur, Lee always gave the same answer. With Arthur, she plans to build a mountain. She's seen in this in the song Gonna Build a Mountain, which expresses her ambitions to create something monumental that will astonish the world. If you recall the words from the opening cartoon, you'll notice that mountains there were contrasted with love. Lee wants to rise above his surroundings.
The world needs love. Is love, sweet love. Lord, we don't need another mountain. There are mountains and hillsides.
Harley's portrait can also be expanded by the song I've Got the World on a String, which symbolizes the sense of control and power. Interestingly, this song is first performed by the clinic guard Jackie Sullivan, and later by Lee at the peak of her transformation, while she's in the Joker apartment, one she has naturally seen many times in his film.
You know, I must have watched that TV movie they made about you like 20 times.
Lee's arc is even easier to trace than Arthur's, simply by paying attention to the visual changes. The man starts without makeup, then with makeup, and by the end both merge into one. The woman starts with cozy, gentle home attire, but finishes with bold makeup, aggressive face paint, and clothing and a hairstyle that strip her of any remaining femininity. These changes can be traced scene by scene, just like Arthur. At the same time, Lee did not become the Joker, but rather her own representation of the Joker, which she derived from repeatedly watching his film, and of course from her fantasies. The character ultimately completely lost herself as a person.
To me, the birth of Harley Quinn is when Arthur rejects Joker, and Harley has fully retreated into a fantasy to survive without him.
Harley Lee Quinn is a hardcore fan of the Joker, who sees him only a source of power and symbol of protest, yet she barely sees the person behind the clown makeup. Arthur, in turn, sees Lee as a loving and caring woman, completely ignoring all that was mentioned earlier. This is not surprising, as he too remains in his own illusions, being truly in love, and as we know, love is blind. Both characters are mad, but in their own way, and their obsessions drive their transformations. Harley is gradually consumed by the flames of chaos, which transfer from the one she sees as the Joker. In one scene, she inhales his cigarette smoke, which we also associate with the Shadow.
I don't think you should smoke. I think it makes you look cavalier.
Ironically, I see the author, having fallen in love with Harley, goes through the reverse journey and heals from the Shadow's influence. Well, who could call this girl an incompetent psychotherapist after that?
For once I can say this is mine, you can't take it.
After his first meeting with Lee, Arthur immediately undergoes a transformation and feels a zest for life. For the first time in a long while, he tells a joke to a guard, earning a cigarette, and a pat on the shoulders hints at a feeling within him which Sullivan identifies as arrogance. We clearly see how Arthur changes, but what exactly triggers this change? Love or the Joker, who has awakened somewhere deep inside his psyche? Or perhaps both occur simultaneously, making it impossible to separate one from the other. In the next scene, the hero stands in front of the TV, where he's informed of his death sentence, but inside he's elated. He wants to scream out his feelings, overwhelmed with emotion, and feels compelled to sing and dance. What he actually does, however, is only in his mind. Although if such a surge of emotion exists, insist it's not impossible that he will eventually break free. Let's move on to the next song, which is much more interesting for analysis. First, the context. The lawyer has been forbidden Arthur from giving interviews all the time, fearing he might say something unnecessary. This should be the only one, and it must follow a pre-rehearsed script. She naively thinks they will ask him about the conditions in Arkham. Arthur is not allowed to say anything off script, only what will cast him in the right light and create the desired public perception. Again, this will feed his persona, and only that.
This is a chance for you to show a different side of yourself, so the public can see who you really are.
The interview takes place behind bars, further hinting at the protagonist's psychological constraint. At first, everything goes smoothly, as we clearly see from Mariana's reaction, but at some point, things take a turn.
You want to talk about the things that I did in the past, not about who I am now, not how I'm different now.
If while watching you briefly thought that Arthur was about to unleash the Joker, you were right. This scene is constructed to build anticipation for this event, but instead we were given a song about love. The hero unexpectedly starts singing, which catches the interviewer off guard and us as well. Arthur grows bolder, grabs a cigarette from Paddy, even though he promised his lawyer not to smoke, and even makes some movements characteristics of the Joker. But it's Arthur who awakens here, and it is he who finds the courage to express his personal emotions and desires. For the first time, Arthur makes this declaration aloud. His love and relationship with Lee are what makes him wild, and it's for this that he will fight, even if it means losing social support and the chance to be justified. The entire song Bewitched is about love, but it's interesting that within its lyrics the author fully acknowledges being enchanted, recognizing his vulnerability in this relationship and even the mockery he faces because of it. However, this does not change anything for him. Many criticized the poor quality of the musical numbers in the film and harshly criticized Joker 2 for Joaquin Phoenix's unskilled singing and the underutilized potential of the Lady Gaga. But Arthur truly sings this song in front of the camera to a vast audience of Gotham residents glued to their TV screens. He would have sung it regardless of whether this film was a musical, because music inside him is a key part of his personality, and it is this music that we heard throughout the first film.
What, if anything, do you remember about that night?
The music.
Pay close attention to how the character behaves. Yes, he has become more liberated and clearly bolder, but on the other hand, there's still a sense of awkwardness in the background, as if we're witnessing a schoolboy reciting a poem for the first time in front of an audience. This scene is meant to evoke this sense of discomfort and cringe. It must be completely free from any glamour or pomp typical of many musicals. Here, Arthur expresses himself in the only way that feels natural to him. This is who he is. This scene shouldn't entertain you. It exists to allow Arthur to heal himself, to merge the two extremes within himself into one. On one side, the Joker pushes for anarchy. On the other side, Arthur finally feels the one thing he has truly needed all along and now wants to share it with everyone around him. And it works. The song definitely makes an impression on the guard, Jackie Sullivan, and on Lee, who seemingly saw the interview by accident while passing by a store window. It seems she wasn't initially planning to watch it at all.
Musical, musical, I'm sick of these artificial barriers between the musical and the drama.
In the first part of the film, the director played with the duality of tragedy and comedy, as he himself admitted in an interview. In the second part, the boundaries of his game expand slightly. Now, different spheres of entertainment are contrasted, including not only comedy shows, but everything can be turned into entertainment. Songs, dances, films, interviews, live performances, and even court sessions.
Okay. Showtime.
Arthur is the guy in the center of the comedy. Everyone around him is laughing, but it hurts him, turning his subjective story into a tragedy. The story revolves around the lonely, psychologically unwell person, but notice how many around him are trying to squeeze the most out of this situation. The guards encourages the naive guy to kiss Arthur and bet on the result. They take him out into the rain and tie him up for fun. Journalists are storming Arkham, hoping for a sensational interview, while the guards seek their moment of fame and ask for autographs, which will skyrocket in price after the Arthur's death. Some, like Lee, are even ready to manipulate the situation to fuel the flames of this show and take a direct role in it. At the heart of it all is the world's first live televised court session with millions of viewers, humorous acts, costumes, showmen, and unexpected plot twists. And if you are at the center of all this, you have to work on your own representation. It's also worth adding ourselves to this scheme as viewers sitting in the cinema. After all, we came to the session to enjoy, to be entertained. The Joker is the central figure of this entire show. Without him, it simply lacks meaning and would quickly become boring and gloomy. At whose expense is all this entertainment? Correct. It's at Arthur's expense. His suffering is at the center of all the fun. The director fully understands this and refuses to let Arthur's be taken advantage of. It's clear that when Arthur says he can no longer be what others want him to be, his guardians, Joaquin Phoenix and Todd Phillips, are behind him. And they are telling this to us as well. Of course, they understand that once you realize that what you came for will never happen, you will immediately leave the place. The interview performance, the song about love during the trip to the court session, which clearly shows that having fallen in love with Harley, Arthur begins to love the world around him. The song on the phone, none of this is just for your entertainment. There are the songs Arthur truly sung. These songs are the little that the director can do for Arthur personally, and these few minutes may cause the viewer suffering. The reason we are all here is not to hear the real Arthur, the shy, sad, lonely man who has been battered by fate, but within him deeply music has always lived. Finally, he has learned to release it by attending a therapy class with his beloved girl, and it will ultimately heal him, making him a whole person.
We use music in this class to make us whole, to balance the conflicting forces, the fractures within ourselves. All I ask is that you sing if and when you're ready to sing.
Art and creativity are often used in psychotherapy. Music is perhaps one of the simplest and most accessible tools to reach the hidden layers of the human psyche and experience emotions that are closed off to us in daily life. In Arthur's music class, he was immediately instructed that song and music would help express what is sometimes difficult to articulate with words. This will make him whole, and the song during the interview must clearly demonstrate how this works in practice. It should also be noted that our hero uses other effective methods from this series: group involvement in art, drawing repressed images, or keeping a personal journal as ways to combat destructive desires. In this case, naturally, the Joker, or let's say the sexual obsession with his neighbor. In Joker 2, the themes of duality runs through almost every character. My favorite example is Jackie Sullivan, his secondary and insignificant character who could have been a cliched, immoral, and corrupt prison guard. But thanks to those who added a hint of a brighter side, his character became more memorable and alive. Jackie loves music. He enjoys participating in the choir with other patients and watches musicals with them. This also brings him closer to Arthur and gives him some favor, like allowing him to make phone calls from the security booth. Look at how Jackie lights up watching Arthur sing. He's entirely on Arthur's Arthur's side in this moment, even singing the lyrics along with him. It's no surprise that after hearing a personal insult from the Joker later, the guard took it to the heart as a personal betrayal from someone he sympathized with, which turned him into a monster. Personally, I believe this man's brighter side truly wanted to bring joy to these walls, which was completely destroyed by the Joker and his chaos.
You have no fucking idea what it takes to put a little bit of joy into this fucking place.
Or take a look at the two-faced Harvey Dent, a young and ambitious prosecutor with a perfect career in the eyes of society, but possessing the same dark side as Lee and the Joker. The guy clearly loves to show off and be the center of attention, which easily allows us to imagine a situation where he might convict an innocent person just because he can't handle defeat and his inflated ego. Harley wasn't just portrayed as a mad, selfish person. It's a bit more complex and ambiguous with her. Like Arthur, she sang almost all songs for real, in the clinic corridor, outside the courthouse, in the apartment by the mirror, and even outside in front of TV cameras. Yes, this song wasn't a fantasy either. These two really sang and danced against the backdrop of the burning block of the clinic, where people had previously sung to engage with art for healing. As I mentioned earlier, many of Harley's songs reveal her as a woman for whom relationships are a source of power, which cannot be called true selfless love. Between a personal love song and a performance for the crowd, she will always choose the latter. This is why Lee doesn't allow the Joker to be distracted from the show by her, and even kills him in one of the acts. This, by the way, provides a good insight into Arthur's mind after the lawyer reveals the truth about his lover.
So you're saying it's not about us?
It is, but we're singing for them. That's why we're here, honey.
Oh, because I got the sneaking suspicion that we're not giving the people what they want.
After this realization, Arthur immediately starts to feel jealous of Lee's surroundings, and his love for the people around him begins to falter. At the same time, Harley is clearly impressed by Arthur's performance in the interview with Paddy. This is reflected in her performance of her favorite song about entertainment. Furthermore, there is a love song in her repertoire, though it's the only one, the one she sings as Lee reveals her pregnancy. Naturally, we cannot know for sure whether this news about the baby is true. It could have been another manipulation, the most cruel one yet. Moreover, by this point, the viewer is thoroughly confused and struggles to distinguish which songs are truly sung and which exist only in the character's imagination. Todd Phillips himself said in an interview that this was done intentionally. In some sense, it doesn't really matter whether the pregnancy news is true or not. It became another key step in Arthur's individuation. But at the same time, this song was clearly not for outside viewers, but only for the two of them, and I lean towards considering it real. Therefore, Harley most likely carried the baby, which gave us a fleeting chance that it was her who came to Arthur at the end of the film for a date, before he was killed. This would make the ending even more symbolic and grim, as the tragic conclusion of a person striving for love, endlessly running from their followers, from their shadow on its direction, and dying at the hand of deranged fan just a few steps away from their own happiness. Though I should note there are valid counter-arguments here. It's similar to Arthur's fatherhood in the first Joker. There are arguments both for and against, and there is simply no one correct answer. So, Arthur's love affair pushes him toward a series of events that gradually erase the line between him and the Joker. This doesn't help his case or the defense strategy, which is why the lawyer tries to keep him away from Lee. Meanwhile, Arthur becomes more confident and at times even arrogant. He starts to feel the weight of his personality and ego. However, on the path of healing, the Shadow briefly regains control control before ultimately integrated into Arthur's personality. We've already discussed what triggered this. Now let's look at how the Joker acts next. Last time he was seeking revenge on Arthur's tormentors, which to some extent justified his crimes in the eyes of the audience, as well as in the hero's own mind. But this time Arthur faces the unintended consequences of his actions. First, Harry, the only person from Arthur's previous job who understood him. Both had been ridiculed by those around them. The Joker mask forces Arthur to put on a show for the audience, having prepared a few jokes. But this time, instead of aggressive guys or a disgusting talk show host, it's essentially his only friend. As Harry explains that since their last meeting he lost his job and has been having nightmares. We see the Joker mask crack for the first time. Arthur's eyes grow moist, and he starts to feel insecure and wants to quickly end the round. How is the Arthur different from those who turned his life into a nightmare? He isn't. We clearly see that the difference between this Joker and, say, Heath Ledger's Joker is that he's not a psychopath and has not completely lost his humanity, his ability to empathize. This is the one bright thread which, if pulled, could bring Arthur's back. This is exactly what happens after the Joker's return to Arkham, where he faces retribution for his inflated ego. The traditional way of breaking a prisoner's authority in jail is of course physical and sexual violence. But I repeat, the illusion shatters not after the act of violence itself. The true catharsis for Arthur occurs lying in solitary confinement, listening to the guards behind the wall killing the last person in the facility who showed him sympathy and supported him. Ricky was surprisingly similar in character to Arthur in his youth.
Get him fucking out of there! Saints go marching in.
At the moment of his death, the guy hums this song When the Saints Go Marching In, which we've heard throughout the film several times, especially from Sullivan, who loved humming it to himself. It already lived in Arthur's mind, and now it will surely haunt his nightmares. We first heard this song at the beginning when the prisoners, marching one by one, carried their chamber pots and poured them into a communal sink. This seems symbolic and ironic, as this song is a hymn of personal forgiveness and redemption before entering heaven. Initially, this song was barely audible, but later Sullivan hummed it aloud, and in the final act the prisoners were literally shouting it. The last time it's heard in the background just before Arthur is killed.
Let's go!
The theme of the inevitability of Judgment Day is also heard from Lee in the lines of the song Head Happy.
Come on, get happy. Get ready for the judgment.
Director Todd Phillips was fully aware that his version of the Joker was not exactly what the audience expected to see. He's not a criminal mastermind. He won't engage in hand-to-hand combat with Batman or mock a girl in a love with him. Therefore, sooner or later, the image of the Joker will return to its usual state of a complete psychopath with no trace of empathy or chance of redemption. The audience needs exactly this, which is why Arthur must disappear into oblivion. But the creators of the first film are in a position to save Arthur's soul, to make him realize what has happened and try to seek forgiveness before the inevitable approach of Judgment Day, the timer ticking in his head. There are many theories online suggesting the director supposedly hates the fans of the first Joker, that the sequel is revenge on those who didn't understand his film, or that revolutionary groups, be they incels or communists, really exist and the filmmakers need to distance themselves from them. I completely reject these versions simply because I haven't found any evidence to support them. What happened with the sequel can be explained much more simply. If you watch even a couple of interviews with the director or lead actor, you'll understand that they were primarily interested in Arthur, and this fact automatically puts puts the fan of the true canonical Joker in opposition to them. Whether you like the film or not depends on your sympathy for Arthur. The final scene and the final shot clearly show the film's emphasis. In the foreground, a man is dying, while in the background, the blurred silhouette of another psychopath is cutting his own face. You are either the one who sees the bleeding man or the one entirely consumed by yet another Easter egg, caring only about whether this is the canonical Joker or not, and what all this means for the future of the DC universe.
What the